When Khalid ibn al-Walid entered Syria, the Byzantine Empire still believed itself unshakable. Its armies were vast, its fortresses ancient, its generals confident. Yet in the deserts and valleys of Syria, their power would collide with a commander they could neither predict nor withstand. Khalid's march from Iraq to Syria was legendary in itself. To save time, he crossed an arid wasteland that no army had ever dared to traverse. He carefully rationed water, even forcing camels to drink to their limits before slaughtering them days later to extract the last drops for his men. The gamble worked. He arrived not as a weary straggler, but as a thunderbolt, descending on the Byzantine frontier before they even knew he was near. In battle after battle, Khalid's name spread terror. At Ajnadine in 634 CE, his forces met the Byzantines in a decisive clash. Despite being outnumbered, Khalid's use of swift cavalry strikes and disciplined formations shattered the Byzantine lines. The Muslims' momentum carried them across Syria, and the Byzantines retreated northward in shock. Cities that once scoffed at Arabia now opened their gates. But Khalid's greatest test and greatest triumph was still to come. In 636 CE, near the banks of the Yarmouk River, the full might of the Byzantine Empire descended. Estimates speak of an army perhaps twice, even 3 times the size of Khalid's. The Byzantines were confident. This would be the battle to end the Muslim advance. Khalid, however, saw not an ending, but an opportunity. He spent days organizing his forces with meticulous care. He placed cavalry at the wings, infantry at the center, and reserves hidden behind dunes. He ordered discipline, forbade panic, and demanded patience. His soldiers, hardened by years of following him, trusted every word. The Byzantines attacked with overwhelming force. Wave after wave crashed into Muslim lines, and for a moment it seemed they might break. But each time, Khalid rode to the front himself, rallying his men with his presence. He fought like a soldier, not just a commander, and his courage steadied the entire army. Then came his masterpiece. Sensing weakness on the Byzantine flank, Khalid unleashed his cavalry in a sweeping maneuver. They struck with precision, looping behind the enemy, cutting supply lines, and spreading confusion. At the same time, his infantry pressed forward with renewed fury. Trapped between relentless assaults, the Byzantine army began to crumble. The Battle of Yarmouk lasted 6 brutal days. Dust, blood, and fire covered the plains, but by the end, the Byzantine army was shattered. Thousands lay dead, and their dream of reclaiming Syria was gone forever. It was one of the most decisive battles in history, sealing the Muslim conquest of Syria and opening the gates to further expansion. Khalid's name now carried weight not just in Arabia, but across the entire known world. The Byzantines had learned what the Persians already knew. This man was unlike any commander they had faced. His strategies were not born of books or palaces, but of deserts and instinct, sharpened by survival and faith. But what set Khalid apart was not just his brilliance in tactics, but his character. He was harsh in discipline, demanding loyalty and order, but he lived simply, sharing the hardships of his men. He asked for no crown, no palace, no wealth. His greatness lay not in what he took, but in what he gave: victory, stability, and courage. At Yarmouk, Khalid reached the pinnacle of his career. He was the undefeated general, the sword of Allah, the man who had humbled empires. But as history often shows, even the mightiest warriors are not immune to the quieter battles of politics and envy. Soon, a decision would come from Medina that would shock Khalid more than any sword on the battlefield.
The death of Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE shook the Muslim world to its core. Many tribes across Arabia saw it as an opportunity to break away, abandon their allegiance, and follow new claimants who styled themselves as prophets. What followed was a dangerous wave of rebellion known as the Ridda Wars. It was in this chaos that Khalid ibn al-Walid became the indispensable shield of the new Caliph, Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr trusted Khalid more than any other commander. He gave him swift orders: subdue the apostates, crush the false prophets, and bring Arabia back under one banner. To fail meant the collapse of the fragile Muslim state. Khalid understood the weight of that task. For him, there was no hesitation. He moved like a storm across the desert, striking swiftly and decisively. His first target was the false prophet Tulayha al-Asadi, who had rallied thousands to his cause. Tulayha's army was large, confident, and waiting for Khalid. Yet on the battlefield, Khalid's mastery showed. He maneuvered his cavalry in sudden flanking attacks, breaking the morale of Tulayha's men. Though Tulayha escaped, his followers scattered, their rebellion shattered. Khalid moved on without pause. Next came the most dangerous challenge, Musaylima, the liar, who had gathered a massive following in Yamama. Musaylima's army outnumbered Khalid's, and the fighting that followed was some of the bloodiest Arabia had ever seen. The battle raged for hours, with heavy losses on both sides. But Khalid's discipline never wavered. He regrouped his men, pressed the attack relentlessly, and drove his army deep into enemy ranks. In the chaos, a Muslim warrior named Washi, the same man who had once killed the Prophet's uncle Hamza, hurled his spear and struck Musaylima down. With their leader dead, Musaylima's forces collapsed. The victory at Yamama was decisive, but it came at a great cost. Thousands of Muslims fell, including many who had memorized the Quran. The loss was so severe that Abu Bakr ordered the preservation of the Quran in written form, one of the most important moments in Islamic history. For Khalid, Yamama was proof of his relentless will. He had fought until victory was secured, no matter the cost. Arabia was now united again under the Caliphate, and Abu Bakr turned his gaze outward, toward the great empires of Persia and Byzantium. These empires had long dismissed Arabia as a barren land of scattered tribes, incapable of challenging their power. They were about to be proven wrong. Khalid was sent first to Iraq, on the edges of the Persian Empire. With a small force, he faced Persian armies far larger and better equipped. Yet battle after battle, he crushed them with speed and audacity. At the Battle of Walaja, he executed a maneuver that military historians still marvel at today, a double envelopment surrounding the Persian forces on both sides and annihilating them. It was a tactic only used by the greatest generals in history, and Khalid executed it flawlessly in the open desert. His reputation grew with each victory. Word spread quickly. Khalid ibn al-Walid had never lost a battle. His soldiers followed him with unshakable confidence, knowing that discipline, courage, and his tactical genius would guide them to triumph. The Persians, once proud and unshaken, now feared the relentless advance of this desert commander. But Khalid was not done. Even as he struck deep into Persia, the call came from Syria. Muslim forces there were struggling against the might of the Byzantine Empire. Abu Bakr ordered Khalid to leave Iraq and march to their aid. What followed was one of the most legendary marches in history. Khalid led his men across the harshest stretches of desert, through barren lands without water, calculating every step, every ration. Many thought the journey impossible, but Khalid achieved it. His arrival in Syria was not just timely, it turned the tide of the entire campaign. Khalid had proven himself against apostates and Persians alike. Now he would face the greatest challenge of all, the Empire of Rome itself, the Byzantines, at the height of their power. And in that confrontation, he would carve his name into history.
When Khalid ibn al-Walid finally embraced Islam, it was not out of weakness or fear. It was the decision of a man who had studied the strength of his enemies and realized that their strength came not from numbers or weapons, but from faith. In 629 CE, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Khalid set out for Medina with a heavy heart and a restless mind. He had fought Muhammad's followers for years, but the truth had become undeniable. Islam was rising, and nothing could stop it. When he entered Medina, the Prophet greeted him not as a former enemy, but as a brother. Muhammad extended his hand and said words that Khalid would never forget. "I knew, Khalid, that your intelligence would lead you to Islam." From that moment, Khalid's loyalty was sealed. The same brilliance that once brought pain to the Muslims would now defend them. Khalid's first great test as a Muslim commander came almost immediately. The Battle of Mu'tah in 629 CE was the first clash between Muslims and the mighty Byzantine Empire. A Muslim force of about 3,000 faced an army 10 times its size. The Prophet had appointed 3 commanders in succession, but as each one fell in battle, the army was on the brink of collapse. It was then that Khalid took command. The situation was desperate. The Byzantines pushed with overwhelming force, and morale began to crack. But Khalid did not panic. He reorganized the lines, reshaped the formations, and employed a tactic that would echo through history. At nightfall, he ordered a complete reshuffle of the troops. Front lines moved to the rear, banners were reassigned, and every unit changed position. By dawn, when the Byzantines advanced, they believed fresh reinforcements had arrived. Khalid then launched a series of rapid, disciplined counterattacks, striking with precision and retreating before being encircled. The Byzantines, convinced they faced a far larger army, hesitated. Under Khalid's command, the Muslims withdrew strategically, escaping annihilation and returning to Medina intact. For this brilliance, the Prophet gave him the title that would define him forever, Sayf Allah, the sword of Allah. It was more than an honorific. It was a declaration that Khalid was now the weapon of divine will, a blade sharpened not by pride, but by destiny. From that day, Khalid's reputation grew with every campaign. He was not reckless, he was calculated. He taught his men discipline, drilled them in maneuvers, and believed that a commander must lead from the front. His courage was absolute. He fought not for spoils or glory, but for the cause he now believed in. After the Prophet's passing, Khalid's role became even greater. Under the leadership of Abu Bakr, the first caliph, Islam faced rebellion on all sides. Tribes that had once pledged allegiance now broke away, claiming false prophets and demanding independence. It was chaos, a moment that could have shattered the fragile unity of the Muslim world. But in this storm, Khalid was the sword that cut through confusion. He rode at the head of the Muslim armies in the Ridda Wars, crushing rebellion after rebellion with speed and precision. His campaigns against false prophets like Musaylima showcased not only his battlefield skill, but also his relentless determination to secure the foundation of the Islamic State. The Muslims who once feared his name as an enemy now rallied behind him as their shield. The Quraysh general, who had once struck terror into their ranks, was now the defender of their faith, the one who would carry Islam beyond Arabia and into the heartlands of the greatest empires on earth. And Khalid was only getting started. His eyes were already turning north, towards Persia, towards Syria, towards the mighty powers that believed Arabia was nothing more than sand and scattered tribes. They were about to learn that the desert had forged a commander unlike any they had ever faced.
They called him the Sword of Allah, a man who never lost a single battle, whose name made empires tremble. But before he became Islam's greatest general, Khalid ibn al-Walid fought against it. His story is one of transformation, strategy, and unstoppable resolve. Subscribe now if you want to discover how a man who once stood as the Prophet's enemy became the blade that carved the future of an empire. Khalid was born in Mecca around 592 CE into the powerful Quraysh tribe, the same tribe that opposed Prophet Muhammad in the early years. His family, the Banu Makhzum clan, was known for its warriors and horsemen. From childhood, Khalid was immersed in training, archery, swordsmanship, and the art of riding Arab steeds across the desert. The harsh landscape of Arabia shaped boys into fighters, and Khalid grew into one of the fiercest. When Muhammad first declared his message, the Quraysh reacted with hostility. Khalid, loyal to his tribe and its traditions, stood firmly against Islam. He was not only a soldier, but a rising commander, admired for his discipline and sharp mind. By his mid-20s, his reputation as a tactician was already spreading across Mecca. This reputation would reach its first peak at the Battle of Uhud in 625 CE. The Muslims had tasted victory at Badr, and Quraysh sought revenge. Khalid rode with the Quraysh cavalry, positioned at the edge of the battlefield. His eyes scanned every movement, calculating, waiting for the right moment. At first, it seemed the Muslims had won. Quraysh lines broke and panic spread among their ranks. But then Khalid saw something others missed. The Muslim archers who had been stationed on the hilltop were leaving their posts, eager to collect spoils of war. In a heartbeat, Khalid seized the opportunity. He led a lightning cavalry charge around the hill, striking the Muslims from behind. The battlefield turned in seconds. Confusion spread, discipline faltered, and chaos erupted. It was one of the most decisive maneuvers in early Islamic warfare, and it came from Khalid. His tactics transformed a Quraysh defeat into a bloody stalemate. The Prophet himself was injured that day, and many companions fell. Among the Quraysh, Khalid's name became legend. Among the Muslims, it became a reminder of a ruthless enemy who could outthink and outfight entire armies. But Khalid's brilliance did not come only from raw aggression. He studied patterns of war, understood the terrain, and adapted faster than his opponents. At Uhud, he proved that battles were not won only with courage, but with timing and precision. That lesson stayed with him, and one day it would serve Islam instead of Quraysh. In the years that followed, Khalid continued to serve the Quraysh cause. Yet something inside him began to shift. The Muslims, once persecuted minority, were no longer weak. They stood firm at Hudaybiyah, negotiating peace with strength and dignity. Khalid, watching from a distance, began to see a different side of Muhammad and his followers: discipline, unity, and a faith that no sword could break. For a man like Khalid, raised to respect strength and honor above all, this was a revelation. The Quraysh might still resist Muhammad, but deep inside, Khalid was beginning to realize that Islam was not a fleeting movement. It was destiny, and destiny had a way of finding its greatest warriors. And so, the man who had once nearly crushed Islam at Uhud would soon ride into the Prophet's camp, not as an enemy, but as the sharpest blade in Allah's hand.
Despite his unmatched victories, Khalid ibn al-Walid soon faced a blow no enemy had ever managed to strike against him. It did not come from the Persians nor the Byzantines, but from within his own people. After the death of Caliph Abu Bakr, the new leader, Umar ibn al-Khattab, made a decision that stunned the Muslim world. He removed Khalid from command. There was no accusation of failure, for Khalid had never lost a battle. Some say Umar feared the people's growing attachment to Khalid, that his name might overshadow the caliphate itself. Others say it was simply Umar's way of reminding the Muslims that victory came from Allah, not from any one man. Whatever the reason, Khalid accepted the order without defiance. When word reached him on the battlefield, Khalid did not argue or rebel. He gathered his troops, announced Umar's decision, and declared that their loyalty was to Allah and the Caliph, not to him. Then he turned and fought as a simple soldier under another commander's lead. It was an act of obedience and humility that revealed as much about Khalid's character as his victories ever had. In the years that followed, Khalid lived quietly, away from politics and command. He never sought revenge, never raised his voice in protest. The man who had led armies against empires now walked the streets of homes in Syria with no guards, no riches, no throne. Despite being removed from power, he remained loved by the people, revered as a living legend. Children whispered his name in awe,
and old soldiers told stories of the man who never lost. But time, which no warrior can defeat, finally caught him. As he lay on his deathbed in 642 CE, Khalid reflected on a life spent in the saddle, under the banner of battle. His body was scarred from countless wounds, spear thrusts, sword cuts, arrow strikes. Every inch of him bore the memory of war. And yet, he whispered in sorrow, "I have fought in so many battles, seeking martyrdom, yet here I am, dying in bed like a camel." It was the lament of a man who had dedicated his life to the battlefield, longing to fall in combat, but instead fated to die quietly. Still, his death shook the Muslim world. He left behind no gold, no palaces, no empire of wealth, only his sword, his armor, and the memory of victories that changed history. Khalid ibn al-Walid's legacy lived on as the sword of Allah. He was the general who never lost, the commander who faced empires and emerged triumphant, the warrior whose humility matched his brilliance. His strategies are still studied by military historians centuries later, his name carried in the same breath as history's greatest commanders. He proved that true greatness lies not in crowns or treasures, but in loyalty, courage, and faith. Khalid's victories carved an empire, but his obedience, even in dismissal, carved respect that would last for all time. And so ends the story of a man who rode through history like a storm across the desert, undefeated, unyielding, unforgettable, the sword of Allah.